Okay, this is Dr. Cardenas, the CEO of the Luminarias Institute, and this is a didactic or a supervisory presentation um, called Identification with the Deceased, which I doubt anyone has heard before. Uh, so here we go, we're getting started. So we'll get past this initial slide and go to the next slide. All right, so we're talking about a grief reaction, a form of grief reaction. I have here survivor guilt, right? It's not that. It's more survivor guilt is something that we're used to seeing, usually stemming from a person having a sense of responsibility, therefore guilt for not having either in real life or usually imagine that I should have, right? I should have been able to have done something to prevent it from that person from being injured, much less dying, right? So in that sense, why did my child, why did my spouse, why did my friend die? Why not me, right? That's oftentimes the question, why not me? And they're asking that question, they feel guilty and they feel bad. Um, uh, Even sometimes due to what I've had clients who feel this way when they expected to die first, right? Let's say a couple and he's older than her and he expects to die first and here she goes and dies when apparently he had illnesses. They weren't even aware that she had any. So they have those questions, and there's that feeling of guilt, especially when there's guilt over things that they may have done in the past. So like a client I had who she died of cancer, and she was younger than him, and he'd always had in his mind that he was going to die before her, and he also felt guilty because he had been unfaithful, etc. Early for quite a few years actually in their relationship, and so that also added to that guilt. Um, so again, this is something that we're used to seeing, survivor guilt, but that's not what we're going to go talk about, right? We're talking about something else that's different, and here's the hero identification or identification with the deceased. Um, uh, and usually the deceased is an older person, a person older than the survivor, um, and so it has different dynamics. What they're similar, or we can even say identical, is that that can last for years and years and years, right? That it's not processed, it's not dealt with. It may not even ever be even truly touched upon, especially if you don't know the second one that even exists. So how is a family member or someone who's concerned going to ask about it, much less a therapist? But that's where here we are with therapists, and the idea is to know about this so you'll know to ask and help persons process something that usually doesn't get processed. Okay, next slide, Ben. Those of you remember that when we did the presentation, the last one on trauma and treatment of trauma, and then this slide about individual and collectivist society where it has locus of control, internal, external, and locus of responsibility, internal, external. And again, this is something that's not new, but we tend to be taught strategies that focused on that upper left quadrant, right, of the individual, and not so much engaging with the family, right, which is again very interesting, given that most persons that I'm talking to right now, most of you that are trainees or students, you're in MFT programs, marriage and family, the collective, right? And so this is more an extension of what happens, how it affects the individual, that this importance of the family, the familial connection, right? Family members, or that family feeling of family collective, of that tie, right? That somebody, you feel like that person's your dad, even though technically he's not your dad, right? Or that figure, okay? And this is something that happens very often. We see in the with persons of color, Latinos, and mentioned before that Martinez in 2008 brings this up and mentions that. So that's a very common, this is why, well, that's why I have this slide here again, bringing that concept of that way of thinking to prepare us for how this makes sense. Okay, next slide, man. Again, very quickly, This was there as well. Again, the Western society and Eastern society, and then individualist and all that. Very almost, we can overlap this on the previous slide. Okay, so being able to look at that again, looking at the collectivist, the group, the family, the community, and its importance and its impact on the person as they're growing, as they're engaging, and then how when something happens to disrupt, right, that situation. So that's, again, it's pretty logical. And again, it goes with the thinking and the pattern of how we look at things and the Illuminati as context. Okay. All right, Ben, next slide. Okay, so if we look at happiness, right, and what values or what is connected to that, and when you're not happy, you might be sad, or more seriously, you might be depressed. Happiness, things are going along pretty well, and then you're depressed due to an interruption, as I said, because something happened, even if it's expected, but you didn't expect it. It was like not yet. You know, I wasn't expecting it yet. You mentioned a client whose wife died. It's like, well, I thought I had more time, right? Or something like that, where yeah, you expect, you know, we know everybody's going to die at some point, but you thought not yet. They're so young, they're so vibrant, or whatever. Okay, so intrinsic versus extrinsic. Intrinsic being the self, extrinsic others. Okay, well, there's a connection with others. All right, and you're learning from, and especially in the context of what we're talking about, that this person, the loved one, is someone that you're learning from, and you're hoping to learn even more from. Right? You want to be like that person. I hope one day to be like this person. Right? And hope one day to be able to even be close to how that person is. And that's what we're talking about in terms of that engagement. That's not so much about developing me by itself, but this is my model, right? This is the person that I would love to be like in some way. I hope to be. And competition versus cooperation. Okay, so competition is a lot of times an adversarial role, right? It's like, and if your adversary were to stop being able to compete with you or die, it's like you're probably not going to be that sad or very unlikely to be depressed. Versus this very cooperative, engaging relationship that you have with someone. Again, you desire for that relationship to continue, and you want the engagement to continue, want it to, in fact, to grow, and you desire to, again, be like that person, not better than them. Versus in the competition, you desire to be better than them, to beat them, right? In video games, you desire to annihilate them, right? So very different engagement in that sense, and how it's connected to your sense of feeling of well-being, of happiness, and when it's interrupted, feeling sad or depressed. Okay. Next slide. Okay, so basically, so what we're talking about is identification with the loved one that dies. Okay, so someone that you feel very close to, and I have there, it's a common grief reaction kept secret, meaning it doesn't get talked about. The first time I talked about this or asked it, in fact, I was giving a presentation in Chicago. I was on another topic, the child left behind. I had a sister who was in Chicago, and she was the child left behind in our family, and I brought this whole concept up and asked the crowd if there are any persons that had experienced what I was talking about, and what I'm going to get into deeper today. And there were quite a few hands that went up, and they're like surprised that it was asked, but they're like, yeah, I know what that's like. I experienced that. Okay. So, and then since then, I've had other times that I've given presentations, and I would just, by the way, ask the question and had other people raise their hands and say, yeah, I know what that is. I experienced that. Persons who had never been in therapy, usually a lot of times in certain ones of the venues or situations I was talking about. Okay. So, and what's involved with this is the fear that the survivor fear, fear that the person has, there's oftentimes terror, and that's that they won't live past the age that the deceased died in. So whether it be whatever age it is, 21, 29, 16, 45, again, the person's younger, and the person that they look up to, the person they identify with, died at that age, and they're very aware of the age, and they're like, I'm afraid I'm not going to live past that age. Okay. And the closer that age gets, the heightened the fear is, right? And the more confident that they are that this is the case, and this is what happens with anxiety. I often talk about having a 0 or 1 to 10, and the more you get 7, 8, 9, 10, this is not just, oh, I'm pretty sure. I know for sure that this is going to be the case, and then you're in terror, as we have in anxiety disorder or panic attacks. A person begins a panic attack. I think I'm having, right, and then once they're in the full mode panic attack, they're like they know they're having a heart attack, right? They know they're not going to survive, and you got to wait till it's over. So they say, oh, well, I guess I didn't have a heart attack, but it's just a question of, well, when is this going to happen again? They know that it's going to happen again, right? So being able to see that it's there. One thing is fear, another get into this terror space, right? Where you have heightened anxiety. So as we see in the whole anxiety disorder spectrum area. Okay. All right. Next slide. Okay. Hope I'm not going too fast. Okay. So I'm going to go into some cases. Ben, next slide. You may remember on one of the cases I mentioned when I did the presentation on trauma, Victoria. I think I gave her that name at that time as well. African American woman, came to therapy, and she was in her early 50s, and so we dealt within her therapy a lot of trauma that she had, which was multiple traumas of child sexual abuse, adult abuse, DV, a lot of different things that happened to her. She was from the South and a Black woman, and had gone through a lot of very difficult stuff here. And this was out in California where she had therapy with me. So she reported some different losses or deaths in her life. And one of them at age 9, her mother died at age 29 of cancer, right? And then so when we went to that, and then it's like, oh, and related that at age 27, she began to have a fear, right, of not making it past age 29. Okay, so by bringing that up, I was able to look at her history of anxiety due to different issues, and this being one of them, and kind of able to better know, oh, this does happen. And that helps the person with anxiety to kind of normalize or let them know it's like you're not the only one. Other people experience this, etc. It's like, because it's a secret, and they're like, I never told you about it. I was afraid that they'd say, what's wrong with you that you have had this thought, right? That other people, normal people, don't have, right? So able to deal with that. Again, she came to me in her early 50s, and then when she was around 45, her maternal grandmother was in her mid 60s when she died, right? So different things that happened in her life. And so, as I said, I treated this woman for a while, and she began fearing in her early 60s that she began fearing she wouldn't live past her grandmother's age. So then we looked more in detail. We reviewed what had happened before in her past, and then got more details about how old her grandmother was. And we can see clearly she identified very closely with her mother. She identified closely with her maternal grandmother, and that connection had developed into this fear, right? Of I won't make it past that person's age when they die. Okay. So luckily she was in therapy with me, and we were able to process this so it wouldn't grow, and it could be dealt with before she reached that age that her grandmother was when she died. So that was helpful. Okay. And just another piece of what we dealt with in their therapy, along with match the history of abuse that this woman experienced in her life. Okay. All right, Ben. Okay. There's another example of a client called Mandy. Came in for treatment of depression and anxiety, and then on his history, his family history, etc., and his older brother, who he was the person he looked up to very much so, in his family. That at age 45, he died of sclerosis, as well as some other medical issues. But even though the brother died of sclerosis, here we see he developed a use or a problem with, medicating his depression, his anxiety with ethanol alcohol, right? ETOH, right? And that fear of dying began, right? That he would die at the same age, or again, wouldn't live past 45, okay? So the gentleman came to therapy, he was in his early 40s, but that thought was already starting to come to him. And so this is anticipatory anxiety, if we put in, our psychological terms, right? Therapy terms. And so be able to normalize it and process it and deal with one of the bases of his self-medicating with alcohol, in fact, and also interestingly identifying with his brother. And what does his brother do? He dealt with his anxiety, he dealt with his depression by drinking and appearing to be okay when he wasn't, when in fact one of his coping mechanisms was a part of what actually killed him. Okay, so being able to kind of process that and break that cycle and connection to bring it into his consciousness. Okay, all right, next slide. Okay. All right, so this is another client. VOC means victims of crime client. So I was seeing that saw him through that program because treatment, in this case, it was a secret because, as it says on the third dot down, it was referred by an older sister, right? Because he was showing all these symptoms. She didn't know it was PTSD, but she knew her brother was not right. And part of the reason is a secret that he was in therapy is because his parents were very devout Jehovah's Witness. And that's part why it's also important to know the family system and dynamics and what religion they follow or are engaged in, because Jehovah's Witnesses are very much not okay with therapy. Okay, you need to, as well as some persons who are very devout in other religions, certain religions, that all you need is faith, or all you need is to do is some other thing, but therapy is just not necessary or contraindicated. So also good to know, because I knew that I couldn't contact his parents and ask them about his symptoms, how he's doing, and have them be a part of the treatment team, because they would probably pull them out of therapy. Okay, so what happened was his best friend, age 21 as well, who they've been very close for the last few years, since I believe the beginning of high school, and his friend was 21 and was shot and died actually in Henry's arms. So what it is that his friend, who had developed a DJ on the side, so he was a DJ at a house party, and this is in the Northeast San Fernando Valley, and he was DJing it, and a gang member was told he couldn't come in, he wasn't welcome there, and so he left and he came back, and as that happened, he came in with the gun and started shooting around, and he shot Henry's friend, the DJ, in the stomach, and Henry was there because he was there supporting his friend, and he died in his arms. So he therefore was, since that time, tried to put on a good front, but his sister saw what was really going on. He was depressed, he felt bad, he kept on reliving what happened and wondering what did I do wrong. But a part of it, he had this fear that he was going to die before age 22, meaning that his friend died at 21, and he's the same age. I'm going to die before I'm 22 as well. They were that close. And so when I brought up this question, it's like, because he didn't tell me about this, I asked him, and he said, yeah, how'd you know? He's like, well, I don't know. I'm just asking if that's something that's come to your head. And he said, yeah, that this is something that was very much a part of his daily, what was going through his head and his mind, and his fear that he wouldn't live past 21. He wouldn't make 22, just like his friend didn't make 22. And so it's able to relieve him of that fear and normalize it, and then process and deal with, again, this is something that does happen, and we can deal more clearly with, PTSD and survivor guilt and all that, so that there's enough to deal with there, much less to get to deal with this and see that this is something that does happen quite a bit, even though um, most people don't ask about it. So I'm wondering, since I asked him directly about it, he didn't bring it up, how many of you can, in your chat, say whether or not you've even heard of this before? Okay. A person who are really close to somebody who's older than them and they're afraid that they're not going to live past that age. You have anything there, Ben?
Yeah.
How many?
I have 3.
And is one of them Lily?
Yeah.
That one doesn't count. Okay.
Well, 2.
All right, 2. All right, so we'll talk about this later. And so here you are in graduate school, and you're hearing about death and dying and all that other stuff and how to deal with it and common treatment things to do. But how many of us even hear about this? I never did. Okay. So we'll get into that a little more. All right. So let's go on to the next slide. Enrique. Okay. So Enrique, father, age 62, died of a heart attack. Okay. So here, age 59, beginning of January of the year he's at 59, he starts feeling anxious. He's afraid of serious injury or death, just kind of overall. And so after his father's death, before he came to see me, he attended therapy for 2 or 3 sessions. Interestingly, they didn't even talk about his father's death. I don't know why. Okay. Then again, you only had 2 or 3 sessions, but still, that would be something that you would want to know, right? Anything, pertinent and happened in your life, in your history. But he was prescribed anti-anxiety medication, right, prior to being seen and coming, because he came to therapy because even though he had the anti-anxiety medication, he was still very anxious, right? It didn't seem to work. So he was seen by me, asked these questions, said yes, that we made the connection between his father's death and his upcoming into that age of his father, who he identified with very strongly. Actually, he didn't realize how strong his connection was to him. And so we're able to process that and make the connection and get to the basis of his fear, okay? Good thing is, you deal with it, you process it, and you don't need medication because we have what's prompting it, what's dealing with it. So we're able to deal with that, and he did stay in therapy longer than 2 or 3 sessions, and we're able to kind of get past it. So very good. Okay, here's the one we're going to get into the most detail. Okay, so this is last slide, Ben. Casey. No, yeah. All right. So age 12, brother died at age 16, right? And then age 16, throughout that whole year of that age, daily fear or terror of death. Because what? Fear, not going to get out of age 16, just like brother. All right, so let's get into more detail. The Jose we're talking about here is me, Jose Cardenas. The person that died was my older brother, Andres Cardenas Jr. Okay, so my family structure is that I have 5 older sisters and 1 younger sister, 2 older brothers, and this is the brother that was the closest in age to me, 3 years older than me, and 2 younger brothers. Okay, so of all the family members that were there, the one that I was closest to and felt most aligned with was my brother Andy. Okay, Andres Jr. I wanted to be like him, but I knew I couldn't be like him. One, we were different in the sense of his body type. He was kind of broader and bigger than me, and I was thinner and smaller, okay, in size and stature. But he had a lot of characteristics that I looked up to. Um, Not to say my other brother, oldest brother, Richard, I looked up to a lot of things in him, and he was a part of why I knew I was confident I was going to go to college because he went to college. Um, and even though my brother um, died before he can get out of high school, his plan was to go to college as well. Okay, he was very athletic. He was on the football team. He went to Boise State, which I didn't know what the heck that was, but that was because of his academics and his um, you know, leadership skills, etc. Um, so he did that just the year before he died, and so there's these things that were going on, and so that happened. Here we are. The drowning is July 4th, 1971, Los Cetos Beach. Our family had been going there for years. I would go there as well with him. We'd help my dad because he owned property down there, and we spent a lot of time together. And he just did so many things, and he was the one that I felt protected me the most from things, and I just wanted to do things like he did. I wanted to do things some like my dad did, but there were many more things I wanted to do like my brother did and my dad because they were different, definitely a different style. Um, and again, this trauma was never processed in therapy. And what I mean by that is in graduate school, um, you go to group therapy, you do all these different things, and it's also never processed because nobody ever brought it up there. Okay. Uh, so that's very important. So very important that in terms of I never heard about this in school, even though told I didn't keep it a secret at all about when they asked about my family history and anything that had gone on or things like that. I'd bring it up, and all these teachers and professors that were teaching me about therapy and to be a therapist, they never caught on or brought it up. Then I went to graduate school, and then when I was finished with graduate school, I did a postdoctoral internship in in Ventura County. And even then, it's like, well, I think I still need some more therapy. So I went to some individual therapy there with a very psychologist who had been around quite a long time. I remember he was a older Anglo person with white hair, and I thought he'll help me deal with whatever I need to deal with. There's something, I guess, still more there, and he never brought it up either. So it was never processed because none of the therapists I ever um, knew to deal with this or to bring it up, okay, or to pull it out, okay. So that's where this knowledge or desire to see how much a person has experienced this out there, and to bring it out because it is something real, even though I hadn't seen it in any books and I hadn't um, had any training by persons who were training me to let me know how to deal with this. And of course, the key, I talk about that with therapists, like usually those of us that get into the field of therapy to either figure out something else, something about us and or about our family. And clearly this is probably why I specialize in trauma, because of what happened to me at age 12 and how I handled it and how I kind of stepped right into his shoes as much as I could and doing what I needed to do. And nobody had a clue that I had for a whole year. Clearly, I was afraid I was going to die because I was having good grades. Maybe I was just a little quieter than I was before, but there was nothing anybody could tell. Okay, and I wasn't going to tell anybody. Because nobody asked. I'm sure if somebody would have asked, I would be like, "Yeah, how did you know?" Or but but it never happened. Okay, so that's it for the cases that I wanted to present, and this would in terms of looking at it in terms of, I call it identification with the deceased, but it's probably a form of quasi PTSD delayed, right? Because it may happen years later. However, in that case where we had the client who was 21, the same age as his best friend when he died, and he was at that moment experiencing, a part of what he was experiencing was the fear of, I'm not going to make it to 22, just like my friend did. Okay, so any questions? Ben, in the chat, can you bring that up, or that people might have written before?
The only ones that came up were two people who actually say that they were aware of that trauma that you were talking about.
Okay.
And two people at least.
Okay, so let's open it up. I'm curious, Luis and Natasha, where you guys heard this from before, and want to know if you heard it in your graduate program. Luis, why don't you go first?
Yeah, no, I just remember my dad, like he was afraid of because his dad, well, my grandpa, he died when he was like 60. So my dad was 30 at the time, 30 something, and then he was just scared, like, oh, he was like trying to talk to us, like, oh yeah, our family dies young at 60. So then he was just like deathly afraid of dying at 60. But he's 60, he just turned 60 this year actually, and he's good, but he never really talked to anybody about it. So that was like the first time that I remember right now when you were talking about it. Yeah.
Okay, well, my point being that you didn't hear about it in graduate school
Oh, no.
or read about it in any psychology stuff.
No, it just came up right now when you were talking about it.
Well, and he's talking about in his 30s, about 20 some years prior to the date he's worried about, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, thanks for sharing. Nadine, was it?
It was Natasha.
Oh, Natasha. Okay, I didn't write it down. All right, Natasha.
Well, I didn't hear about this until now. But as you're talking, I remembered there was just a friend of mine that so I guess he told me about this, and his story was that he was at like a party one time and some random girl went up to him and said, I guess she was like psychic or something, and she was like, oh, you have to be really careful around water because let's say he at this time he was like 17, he is now like 26. So at 17 she was like, you have to be really careful around bodies of water because that's how you're going to die. You're going to drown in a large body of water. So he kind of just laughed it off and ignored it. And then shortly after, he talked to his mom about something, and it came up where I guess he has a long line of family members that have all drowned. Like his great grandparents both drowned, I think, in the ocean, his grandparents, like aunts and uncles. And so then since that moment, he's kind of been really scared about going near water because the potential of drowning, I guess.
So
That's kind of like the closest thing that I've heard, I would say. But no, I never heard about this at Pepperdine.
Okay. All right, Lily, the inside person.
I've never heard it in an educational setting. I haven't. This is definitely the first time I hear about it in this sense. But definitely even just in practice, that it's been something that's been brought up quite a few times in the same instances of, well, my parent died at this time, at this age, so therefore they're relating to that. And I think the other, and I was going to type in the question was, Is this similar to, because I had this happen to me when I had someone that we were working with pass away, and he was around the same age as my dad. So then I became very anxious of, oh my God, like he's my dad's age, and like these similarities. And then I got some anxiety over having my dad pass, even though they weren't related.
Right. But again, I would say it makes sense in terms of if we look at anxiety disorder, right? In terms of what if goes to what is, right? So being able to say what if, and that's why it's important to be able to discuss, say, well, let's break it down, right? You know, that connection makes sense. However, let's challenge it, right? In terms of a cognitive behavioral way or something. But being able to say, oh, but my experience of being able to bring it up to people, just like right there, it kind of deflates it a lot. Okay, it's like, oh, because but even because like, well, oh, you mean people feel this and then they survive it? Yeah, just like when part of when we have persons that come in with panic attacks, right? And we say, oh, and this is what happens, and how many times have you been to the ER? It's like, and what have they told you? It's like, and being common. And so the next time this happens, if it happens, if you don't use these techniques that we know work, etc., what they're going to tell you is this, but being able to talk to them when they're 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, because if they're 8, 9, 10, you can't talk to them. They're in the midst of not what if, what is. I am having an anxiety attack, right? I need to get an EKG done again. So being able to help them be there so that they don't go to that space like, wait a minute, this happened. Just like I don't necessarily catastrophize, that this is going to happen to this person I love. I don't have to catastrophize that my dad's going to die at age 54, because es tan similar al señor. They look the same, wear the same hat, whatever. It's like, wait a minute.
All those irrational thoughts, definitely.
Yeah.
I think that's something we often see with our clients, right? All the irrational thoughts that just jump into their head, and part of the work is to be able to kind of break them down, like you're saying.
Slow it down and break it apart. Okay. But I was thinking that I actually told you about this at some point, because I had mentioned it in supervision with different people, but not formally. Okay.
No.
But my point is this is real. It does happen. I haven't made it up. Okay. And I'm trying to get the year that I went to Chicago and kind of openly said that way over there, they had no idea who I was, and these hands went up, it's like, oh, this is a real phenomenon. This is something that happens, right? And most of that population there that I was speaking to was Latino, Spanish speakers. So it's something that happens. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen in the Anglo community, but this has been my experience. Like, again, Black client and etc. So being able to normalize it, and so much of what we do with anxiety disorders is normalize and say, look, and say, and there's a way to handle this. And this thing left unchecked, this thing just gets bigger and bigger. And as the date comes closer and closer, it gets bigger. For different people, just like Luis was saying, it's like, here's 20 some years before, he's already 60,
Right.
versus, maybe a couple years before or a few months before, or, but the thing is, in our mind, our unconscious gets triggered, and we're aware of stuff and what various things that can trigger it, to go there and tap into it and kind of gear up and start amping up that anxiety. Okay. So my point being here, everybody is, and nobody's heard about this in their training. Okay. And you're a licensed person that's been licensed for a while. And even if you're training with me, somehow I didn't get it to you. Okay. So, yeah. All right. So any more live questions? Anybody want to have a question or commentary?
If anybody wants to jump in, they could definitely cut me off, because I'm thinking of just in our Latino population, how there's always oral history passed down. So we will often hear, oh, el tío fulano y tu abuela y tu mamá, and it just sort of becomes this story that it's not a story that we create in our head at this point. It's just that we hear it so often, o se murió como la abuelita, o es igual que, right? So then we start to sort of normalize and parallel those things where then our own anxiety eventually gets triggered. And I think it's something to keep in mind as we're assessing you know, our clients at whatever age, especially if they're younger, to be able to talk to parents and kind of get a little bit of the oral history of what might be triggering some of these anxieties in our kiddos, right? Because it's prevalent, because sometimes, even like we were talking about at our at the training that Yvette and I did, is that kids will often be excluded from the happenings of a death one, of a loved one, of a burial, and they'll overhear certain things, and then, you know, that'll be triggering so whatever anxieties or whatever irrational thoughts that a 7, a 10, a 15-year-old is having. But my thought is, like, this is a really good way to kind of just keep it in the forefront of interviewing or assessing.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, and it's also very common for families that I know in our family, that there's a person that died, maybe young, like on my mom's side of the family, there was a tia, and she, so of course she was beautiful and all that other stuff, but she died in La Presa at the dam. And then after that, everybody names a female, gives her name. Okay. Oh, that's why there's so many godmen. So that's why there's so many in that family, right? And like, and somebody might, if they're told perhaps a lot, it's like, and you're just like her, and you're just like, well, if I'm just like her, does that mean? And how old was she when she died? Okay, maybe how she died, or just the age, right? And so being able to say, you know, so it would make sense. I also think that I would play around in my mind, because you know, you young therapists, you know, people find out, oh, you're a therapist, right? Oh, are you psychoanalyzing me and all that? No, we don't do that. I'm not working. You're not paying me. All right. Or I'm not getting hours for this. Okay. But we still walk around and we evaluate things. I'm evaluating people, you know, it just happens. And I remember I would go to a big store for a few years, and I would see this guy that worked there, one of those do-it-yourself stores, because that's what I do for, because I own the house, and also, but because I like doing that and making things and stuff. And I would see this guy that would basically, he was a Elvis Presley impersonator, right? You know, his hair all the time was like Elvis and all this other stuff, you know, the mullet period, you know, and all, and it went through my head. It's like, I wonder how old he is, and I wonder if he's going to go through that when he hits that age of Elvis, you know? It went through my head. I'm like, because it's like, this guy was like every day Elvis, you know? So just curious, you know, it's like, you know, so again, identifying with people, and it could be people you know, or people that you just associate with, right? And so being able to do that, and in the time of COVID, and I think also in the time of persons who look up to, because like I know right now we have a case, there's a couple of cases of literally 12-year-olds who have had people they look up to die, older brother, etc. And you know what happens, there tends to be a elevating almost to saint level, right? This person, like, even though he was a gang member and all that, say, yeah, but I still want to be like him in this way, and romanticizing, you know, him, etc. But that connection of, well, I do want to be like him, and I'm just going to pretend like he doesn't have these other characteristics. But there again, this fear of, does that mean even if I live my life straight, you know, not like that, I could still die, you know? So being able to again evaluate the death and your connection and your, you know, and just asking, has this gone through? Or for some persons like that 12-year-old and somebody older, say, FYI, kind of an inoculation, this happens sometimes. I'm not saying it's going to happen to you, but it happens sometimes. Oh yeah, let's say it clicks there, it's like, oh, wait a minute, that happens. It doesn't mean that, because the thought happens doesn't mean that that's going to happen. Because the thought happens that I might die at age whatever it is, 26 or 24, whatever, it doesn't mean that I am. It's a thought. because we've talked about it, and my therapist mentioned, because I look up to that person, because I love that person, because I see that person, identify just kind of like, I want to be like Mike, right? Remember when Michael, before you guys, I think Lily knows what I'm talking about. I want to be like Mike. I want to be like Michael Jordan, right? Etc. So again, these people that there's somebody that you really idolize and look up to. It's like, I want to be like that person, and then they not, right? And it's like, oh, that magical thinking that might be there because you so idolize this person,
Right.
so looked up to them. Okay. So the others that are there, any questions or commentary?
Even if it's just a thought rolling around in our head, right? Because the other thing, and I know some of us doing the work that we're doing right now and in the schools that we're in, we might see this, like Dr. Cardenas mentioned earlier too. This is the other thing that popped into my head. I was reading a book by Father Boyle, and he talks a little bit about this in his books, because a lot of the gang members that he's dealt with have been around them often confessing to him, I'm not going to make it past this age. Like
Yeah.
their lifespan is X, especially when they're seeing in their community that their fellow, brothers in gangs are dying at that age. So that might be something else that comes to mind when we're working with our youth.
And with that population too, where it's like, well, if I do that, it's a way of honoring that person. Okay, so it's kind of following them. It's like, well, they died young, and they, and because they're looking for adulation. Okay, because you look up to people, and that's why working in that population in the community, if you speak to that person that didn't die, and has somebody, a younger brother or somebody that looks up to them, and like, I don't want them to live this life. I'm giving you the honesty because I can't give it to them, right? Or they won't listen to me, right? So being able to have them see the rest of the story of, hey, it's not all that. It's idolized, right? It's romanticized. But but there's so much that let's deal with the reality. They do cry. Okay, you know what it's like to be when the lights out are in juvenile hall, in prison, they're crying. Okay, things like that. Or they get raped. All this stuff they don't tell you about this stuff, right? So being able to look at the reality and kind of pop review that have those cases, how would you bring this up to them? Because I want you to, okay, to bring it up. It's like, you look up to this person, and bringing up this dynamic, this thing. Who has those cases? I think Gio might be. I think Gio might be one. He's not here, right?
Oh, Luis has one.
Luis?
Yep.
All right, pop in.
Yeah, I have one. And he's always his brother, he was in a gang and he almost died in front of him. So he's like really anxious about that. But they sent his brother away, they sent him back to Mexico, but he's still hanging out with like the same crowd. They moved to another city, but he's still going back to the same city where his brother's gang's from. And he's not directly involved in gangs, but he still talks to like the gang members, the friends, like everybody else that was related to his brother. Just I guess he wants to be closer to his brother. So we've been kind of trying to work on, his changing his narrative of that, creating his own story. So just making him realize that, his brother's life is not his life.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe showing like say in the drug treatment world, they talk about pulling the covers, right? And let's look at the breast of it, not this idolized way of looking at it, but the ugly, painful side about that, right? That that it gets covered up. Why do gang members use so much? Not just alcohol, but a bunch of other stuff. What are they medicated, right? What else is there? So it's not all that glamour. In fact, if you really talk to gang members, it's boring. most of their life is really boring. Okay. And then a lot of times, a lot of stuff they don't even remember, right? Because they're wasted when they did a lot of this stuff. Okay. So, so, it's kind of like it's, it's similar in terms of here, you have people in college, they're like, well, if a tree falls in the forest and nobody's there, you know, it didn't make any sound, right? We're not even gonna get into that. I wasn't a philosophy major, but I heard this BS. Okay. Um, but you know, if in that sense, if they're living this lifestyle, but if they don't remember parts of it, did it even really happen? How could you enjoy something if you have no memory for it, right? If you did it in a blacked out state, okay, etc. So how much of your brother's life was he even aware of? Because if it's all that great, it's all that. It's like it's not. Okay, so being able to be conscious of your experiences and also conscious of what they're unconscious of, you know, and that's where we have these cautionary tales, you know, and his brother maybe hasn't woken up yet to be able to say, don't live this because it's not all that. It's not all what it's cracked up to. Okay. Um, so being able to kind of pull his covers in that way, you know, I'm not saying don't love your brother, right? But I'm just saying, but this lifestyle, there's reasons he was doing that, and let's look at what was pushing him. So what was the basis, right, of that? Okay. Um, yeah. But but like I know Gio has a client who lost somebody, you know, and the kid's 12. So, and how much has that been processed, and what is awaiting him perhaps when he gets close to that age. Okay. But again, looking at it as if it's real close or just inoculating the person so they can be prepared for the possibility of this coming up later, right? And not being alone, letting them know they can bring it up. Yeah.
Are we good? Yeah, I think this is the one of those topics, especially now with COVID. I just have like all these like swirling clients in my head and just how they're, especially after the holidays and dealing with clients that at this point it's that they know of people that have passed and are deathly afraid of catching COVID because then that identification comes back into play, right? They died, so therefore I might die.
Or like you said, the other kind of related one of they died, does that mean somebody else I care about is going to die?
Right.
My tia died and she's just a few years older than my mom, and I see them as like twins, you know, does that mean my mom's going to, even though my mom's okay right now?
Right.
So being able to say, well, let's look at that, because that's anxiety, right? Anxiety is sort of like it just goes. What if goes to what is. So being able to normalize and talk about that, and even us ask that question. But again, I think sometimes it's like, oh, so you're planting and you're suggesting an anxiety for a person. No, we're just saying, you know, I wonder. So then they say, again, so many times they'll be like, really? What? Yeah, it's been going through my head. And I mean, and if it hadn't been going to say, well, I hadn't thought of that. It doesn't make sense to me. Okay, good. You know, versus kind of been kind of there. It's like now you've really shed a line. It's like that's what's been kind of growing there. You know, that's the little spider that's been there that's going to become a tarantula. That's going to become Stranger Things. You know, it's like so being able to deal with things early on and say, oh, it is possible for that to grow. So let's catch it early and you know, deal with it now. Okay.
Right.
Or prepare you so you know how to deal with it if it not for sure it's going to, but if it comes up later, right? So yeah. So at some point, well, and again now you guys can't say you don't know about it, and you can be ready, okay? Because again, so many clients, in particular clients that I dealt with later, including my own experience, like, nope, nope, nobody's saying, oh, well, yeah, that's asking me the question. Nobody asking, oh, did you make this connection? Did this happen to you? It's like, nope, no, nobody asked. Nobody were aware. Nobody was aware. So, but it felt really good. Just on a personal note, it felt really good to be able to catch people before they got to that spot. Before they could, again, and I really, because it was my normality, I had no idea that I was in that heightened state of anxiety for a year. And nobody knew, nobody could tell. So, because I just seemed okay. The grades are doing good. No drop in grades. No, looking good. Trying my best. Trying to stay busy, probably to not feel that, but it's there.
I think that's a really good point too. And it's just that reminder of, just because things look good on the outside, right? I've talked to parents when when they're referring their client in, when they're referring their child in, and sometimes the school will say, just fine, maybe they need it, maybe they don't, because the school sees something. And you're asking the parent all these questions. Have you seen a drop in grades? Do they appear sad? Do they cry? Do they isolate? And you kind of go down the list, and the parents are like, nope, haven't, no, everything's fine. No, they're fine. They're social. They hang out. We go together. They're all, and then you get to talk to the client by themselves, and the parent has minimal clue that this is how this client is feeling about this situation. So I'm always very cognizant of not, I'll take either one's information with a grain of salt, because we never know, right? Like, okay, thank you for that information. And then you talk to the other party and they're like, yeah, it's so hard to get out of bed in the morning, and I have these thoughts, and right. And sometimes I'll ask, do you think your parents have noticed this? And they're like, no, I do a pretty good job of hiding it. They'll be very honest up front too. So
yeah, thank you. And that's why, in terms of, like I said, intake and getting information, and we do get some information from the parents that say when they're cooperative, and then, but we have the client we ask them the ACEs. It's like, if there's somebody that died that was important to them, maybe according to the parent, that person wasn't that important to them, but to them, that person was important to them, right? Or sometimes, like, well, I'll ask the timeline of traumas in the family. Did anybody around here die that was important to your mother or your father? Somebody important to you, because then that also helps you. It's like, oh, that normal. So it seems like your dad got depressed. And that's why he backed off from you, not because there's anything wrong with you, but because he was dealing with his father's death or something else. It's like, oh, they don't get that because when there's a void, when there's a vacuum, our mind fill it in with something to have it make sense. Okay, so being able to, again, to use that in terms of the ACEs for that person, like, well, this person died, and my family thought that person wasn't important to me, right? Just like, okay, the child who was brought up in this other country and then brought over here a few years ago or some years ago, and they haven't been back, and who raised them until age 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. It was their grandparent, which was their emotional mom, and now that grandparent dies and they can't go to Mexico, Guatemala, or anywhere, and mom does, who hasn't seen her for years, right? But this kid, they're like, why should I send her? Why should I send him? Even if I can legally, right? It's like, why should I? It's their grandma. It's not like she's her mom. Or it's her aunt. It's not like she's her mom. Well, psychologically, she is. She bonded more with her than with you, because you came here and you thought you would bring her soon, but that soon kept on, coming till later. So that, in terms of also that, where the parents so many times, because admitting that, allowing themselves to think about that, say, oh my gosh, what did I do to my kid, even though I didn't do it on purpose, right? So being able, it's like, well, you didn't do it to your kid. This is what happened.
Yeah.
you know, but so many times the adult, the other person who loves this person don't see it. So of course they can't report it to us that way. They can say, you know, no sé, pero ¿qué te parece? ¿Le puedes preguntar si le afectó? You know, but they don't even say that. Say, well, this happened, but I'm sure she's okay. I'm sure he's okay, right? It's like, so they're aware of information, but they don't want to even think to themselves that that could have had a traumatic effect, right?
Correct.
Again, but with you all that are listening, in terms of it, you know, getting past this, you're not going to re-traumatize them by asking about the trauma or asking them that if they had an impact or had these thoughts. You're not going to plant something in there, just like asking them, you know, have you ever thought of harming yourself or killing yourself? You're not planting in them, you know, well, you ought to. This is the next step in your go from the sad to depressed because I've asked you these questions. You know, so yeah. Any commentary, you guys? Trainings? Make this your supervision. This won't be a part of the tape.
Yeah, and if anybody has any other questions regarding a case maybe they're dealing with, whether it's this topic or another, not a problem. This is still your time to be able to talk about any of these cases.
I have a question. So I have a client in like 15 minutes. So I talked to the wife and him separately, and the wife told me on Wednesday that his aunt died, and he was trying to hurry up and rush to Arizona, but leaving his family behind. If he doesn't bring it up, because she said that he probably won't bring it up, how should I go about bringing it up?
Well, question: Does his it's common knowledge that he's in therapy then,
Yeah.
okay? And you could just make the connection yourself and say, you know, your wife mentioned this. I'm wondering. Okay, not your wife wanted me to ask you. Your wife's wondering. It's like I'm wondering. Okay, because again, common knowledge. You know, because you could hear that from her, and her just say, oh, by the way, you know, these are our plans. This is what's going on. You know, and she's not making the connection. I don't know. You know, I'm concerned about his mental state or how it'll affect him. You are. Okay, so being able to bring things up because they're common knowledge, and letting them know it's like, you know, this is something again that we're aware of. And sometimes our client isn't even aware of it, right? You know, how are you feeling about that? What do you mean? You know, I'm hurried, you know, because there's all this stuff that I got to take care of, you know, but is it bringing up any of these other feelings? You know, are you just hurried or are you anxious? Are you hurried or are you worried about this? Are you know, is it bringing up, you know, and these other feelings perhaps? I'm wondering. You know, that's where we as, you know, again, the Colombo thing, like, I don't know about you, but I'm wondering, you know, estoy pensando que let me pass this by you, you know, let me give you this kind of random thought that I have, you know, and like, well, maybe it's not so random now that you ask it, ya que me preguntas, right? It's like, okay, you know, that makes sense, you know, so again, because that's where, you know, we deal with other family members and stuff, and a lot of times, but I'm afraid that they're gonna get mad at me or whatever. It's like, it's okay, I'll have them get mad at me. You know, you know, you know that I'm sticking my nose in. It's like, no, you're not. You care about this person. I can ask them because I'm learning to care about them, but I don't love them. You do. Okay, so being able to, you know, again, we make connections. We say this is something common here. Perhaps you haven't, you know, experienced it, but it may come up, right? It may come up. You know, it's like, oh, just like, you know, with death, we're talking about, you know, you might not experience, but it may come up in your head that you're not angry at that person for dying, right? Like, so if that comes up, know that it's normal. It happens. And it doesn't mean that you don't love them. Instead, it's like, oh, right? So we're giving them permission to experience something so that they don't deny it to themselves, much less deny it to us. Okay? So, make sense? Any your version of that, Lily?
No, I'm smiling because I'm like, yeah, that's how I would approach it. You know, one, I was thinking, okay, do we now, you know, playing devil's advocate, because I'm thinking if it's been an individual session just with the husband and the wife just happened to call and let us know this information, but she's saying, please don't share I said anything. And I don't know, Luis, if that was, or if he knows you're in contact and we, you know, I would just think of that. If, because then if not, I would say, oh, hey, you know, your wife mentioned this. Can you tell me a little bit more? And then he might jump into having the conversation and talking a little bit about like what's going on for him in regards to that process.
Yeah.
She didn't specifically say not to tell him that she told me, but she just said that to bring it up if he doesn't bring it up.
Okay, so obviously they know you're in contact with both and there's no secrets there. Yeah, I would definitely just bring it up in that sense.
Yeah, but again, in terms of, it's not that you're investigating for her, you're investigating because you need to know, okay? So just like, again, FYI, it's like, one, you have two things. I want to know when you're going because I need to know when to schedule you again, because we usually see you on Wednesdays, and it sounds like you're going to be gone on Monday, and won't be here on our usual time that I'm seeing you. That's just practical, right? And the other is like, but since you're leaving, I'm wondering what that brings up for you, okay? Because you're going to be there, okay? Because there's the two things, like, one, we feel guilty because we couldn't go, and then we feel bad because we are going, okay? You know, it's like going, you know, to a negative situation, you're afraid, what am I going to see? Am I going to be able to do anything about it? So, you know, that's going to bring that up. And then if we can't go, it's like, well, I can't go and I can't do anything about it. I can't help, you know, so that's the situation we have right now. It's like, well, I know some people are like, I'm not going to Arizona. Why? Have you looked at the numbers? Bad here. It's like, and it's bad over there. It's like, but then I feel bad, right? Because I'm not going. Either way, it's like being able to process that. I wish I could go and understand you're going, and how are you mitigating that, or perhaps what is that bringing up in the people that are here? I haven't talked to your kids, but your kids are aware, right? And they're being bombarded by all these numbers. And have you talked to them about what you're going to do so that they don't worry about dad's going to be in Arizona and the numbers are really bad, right? And they don't, and they're not wearing masks, or they're like giving it as an option, or here, like, you better wear a mask, you know? It's like, and you might have a kid that's really anxious as it is. It's like, oh, I haven't thought about it. You know what? I hadn't thought about that, you know? And so maybe communicating that, you and your wife communicating that, so our daddy's gonna be gone, and, you know, he's going to wear a mask all the time, da, da, da. Why? Because he loves us and he wants to make sure he's safe, and he doesn't want to bring it back to us. Right? Right? And you have these very, you know, educated teenagers that know everything, and they know that that place is much more dangerous than here. And,
Yeah.
you know, so there's many angles, okay, of bringing it up, okay.
Yeah, I see. All right. Yeah. Thank you.
And you have your client, Luis, at about 6:30.
Yeah, like in 10 minutes. It's usually at 6, but he always runs late, so we switched it to 6:30.
Okay. All right. Anybody else that Lily said? We have two supervisors here that you can ask questions of, even if neither one of you are officially supervised by us. Okay, Natasha.
I need help. So I have a client, male, 17 years old, and reports of having intrusive thoughts, I would say 2 times a day for at least the past 5 years. And it's been increasing as time goes by. So Lily, I think last time we talked about this, you suggested like putting a name to the thoughts, and, you know, telling him like that they're not part of him and it's not who he is. but he reports that nothing's really changed. So I'm not really sure what steps to take from here.
And the intrusive thoughts are what again?
Like hurting his family members or any random person, but he's never actually acted upon any of the thoughts that he's gotten. He says they last between 5 to 10 seconds, or no, sorry. He gets the thought, and then sometimes in the past, he used to feel like he would black out for like 5 to 10 seconds. But that, I guess that hasn't happened for a while. But for example, like today he sent, because I've been having him journal them, like when he gets them, so we kind of know what's going on, like what happens before, after. So saying things like, my little brother is going to get hit by a car right now, or like an hour later, just him wanting to hit his little brother's head so hard that it cracks open, shooting his little brother behind the head. It just so happens that this day happens to be the little brother, but I've seen them where it's been mom, dad, random stranger in the grocery store.
Okay. I have a comment. Okay. What's going through my head is like, what's missing is like. Because, again, permission giving is so important, right? That's like, the saying, dime con quien andas y te diré quién eres, right? Tell me who you're with and I'll tell you who you are. Basically, it's like, where did he get this idea from? Is it from a video game? Is it from a movie? Is it from a certain character, etc.? It's like, I'm afraid I'm going to be like that, like him, like her, like that, okay? And so being able to, own that, there are, entities out there that we know about that are like that enjoy that want us to do that, It's like, so who would that be for him, and since when? He's 16. Was there a time, before this ever happened? And then this thought came to your head. He's not reporting something that we can't imagine seeing that. Okay, are there some video games that you saw that? Are there some movies that you see that? And that's a concern, right? It's like, oh, if you saw the Joker and you did all these different things, it's like, oh, then you're gonna want to be like him, or you'd be like, oh man, that guy's sick. I don't want to be anything like that guy, right? So being able to say, okay, so when we see things, it gives us permission. It tells us how to or how not to deal with, handle, respond, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, sometimes I feel like hitting my brother upside the head, which is totally different than cracking his skull open, right? It's like, right? And it's like, they even make commercials like, I could have had a VA, It's like,
Mm-hmm.
it's not like don't, or people, it's like, oh, have you seen the movie? It's like, if I ever think about that, slap me. It's like, and then they actually do. It's like, what happened? They told me to slap you. It's like, oh yeah. It's like, so you're being, again, coming from a loving place versus, who would do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so what keeps you from doing that? Because this is your brother, this is your mother, these are people that you love, right? But
Yeah. We kind of went back to like, where did these thoughts start from? And the connection that we've made so far is the probability of these thoughts probably started around 7th grade, when he was being bullied for being in a wheelchair and he couldn't defend himself. So that's where we kind of made that connection. But he'll say, like, he will just be talking to somebody. Let's say he's talking to his mom. Hey mom, what are we having for dinner? And then they're in the kitchen or whatever. And then a thought comes into his head. I'm just going to grab this knife and stab her in the neck, like just randomly. And then it's over. And he's like, what the hell was that? That was so weird. Like, it's so annoying. So he's very distraught about these thoughts. And he's like desperate to get them to stop.
so let me ask a few questions. Since
Mhm.
when has he been in a wheelchair?
He was in a wheelchair in 7th grade for, I think he said 6 months, but I could be wrong. Something like that. It was just something that he had, I guess he like broke his leg or something. It was an accident. And he had to just be in a wheelchair. For
So for 6
moderation of
months,
time.
he was disabled, etc., or however he looked at it, and he was he bullied? Did people make fun of him?
Yeah, he was bullied.
Right. And so, and I bet the mom probably told him, just ignore him, or it's gonna pass. And it's like, yeah, he wasn't told that by somebody who's in a wheelchair, right?
Mhm.
It's like, so let's see, have you ever seen somebody in a wheelchair and thought I should stab him in the head or in the neck or whatever? It's like, what keeps him? Because so he's angry at being in a wheelchair, right? And
Mhm.
again, why me, not you, right? Do
Yeah.
you really have empathy and compassion for me? Okay, why is life so unfair to me and not you, as opposed to him being able to have that experience of, hey, since that time, I've been able to be more compassionate. Say, man, I'm glad my brother's never been in a wheelchair. I hope he never was. I'm glad my mom's never been in a wheelchair. I hope she never is. Right? And instead of that, he's
Mhm.
still pissed. He's still angry that this unfairness happened to him. Right? And
Can I
that's
make
not.
a comment at one
Yeah.
point?
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just thinking too, when I hear about intrusive thoughts like these, I obviously think of OCD and OCD treatment. And one thing, the typical example that I always remember with OCD is like, okay, there's the mom who always has these obsessive thoughts about harming her baby, but she loves her baby so much. And the last thing in the world she would want is for any harm to be caused to her baby. So the way I think one technique that might be helpful is knowing that in your heart, you genuinely love these people. You genuinely don't want to hurt anyone. You genuinely are not the kind of person who wants to hurt anyone. However, these thoughts, it's just the OCD. You can just tell yourself it's just the OCD, and learning to develop that resilience in your mind, saying, no, this is who I am. That's just my OCD saying that and talking to me, but this is who I am, and developing that confidence to not let an intrusive thought shake the concept of yourself and your values.
All right.
Yeah,
Comment,
that's
Lily, because I
awesome.
have some comments still.
Just really quick, I think that always brings me to mind too, because one of the things we're focusing on is giving him an intervention, right? To like stop the intrusive thoughts. And there's still part of us that needs to go back to kind of the trauma, what he went through, what he felt, who was the most hurtful, and in what way, because there was certain aspects of that bullying that happened for him where he felt not only disabled, but just maybe, with not being able to, whatever it is, retaliate, or he,
Helpless,
it was to the point where that was the harmful part.
helpless and impotent, maybe.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
didn't want to say, yeah, but yeah,
Meaning
definitely. Yeah.
no power, sin potencia, not sexual, but just
Yeah.
here,
Yeah,
vulnerable.
yeah, like what can I do, right? Whether he was, so maybe there might be a possibility of just going back to that period of time and kind of analyzing and breaking apart all of the bullying, from who specifically. And like Dr. Kerna said, if he ever went to go tell mom, oh, hey, this happened, and she just sort of brushed it off, like, it's all right, turn the other cheek, whatever it was, that, maybe some of these thoughts are intrusive because he wished somebody would have done something for him.
Yeah. Okay. So
Yeah.
looking at intrusive thoughts, it's no accident. It's these thoughts. Okay. It's like he can have intrusive thoughts, and then randomly, I hear this music or this other stuff going, and then I have this visualization of something else, and it's like candies and popcorns and unicorns. It's like there's like, okay, where the hell is this coming from? But we're not worried about it, right? And I'm afraid that I'm gonna go off and buy candies and unicorns and all that stuff. It's like I'm not worried about that, and we're not worried about that. And that's where you see we're looking at we can make sense of stuff that's delusional or psychotic. Okay, how come this person who has this psychotic has that thinking? And that's where and that's where it was such a great study in terms of what really moved people with the Joker movie, as they would say, this kind of makes sense. It's nutty, but it makes sense now, right? Okay, so being able to think, so that how do we make sense of this? Okay, he does have anger, but it's misdirected and misguided. So what is it? What is it? what brought it together, what brought it up, what injustice, right? Because our anger is response to injustice, and each one of us defines that. Okay, it's not fair, right? And when he here he goes and he gets hurt. Was it skateboarding, whatever it was, skateboarding on a bike, whatever? How come other people, I saw them, fall off or do whatever, and they just got up and brushed it off, and all right, they limp, but they didn't have to get a cast or be much less be in a wheelchair for all this time. Why me? That's not fair. That's not fair that I get hurt and I got to be in a wheelchair, even though it's only for 6 months. Just like, okay, let's go to another one that's not quite as severe unless it's you. Here you are. It matters to you how you look, and you have a zit. 16-year-old has a zit. Guess where the zit is?
On the forehead, on the nose.
On your forehead or on your nose, right? And how big is it? Or according to that person, oh my God, I can't go to school today, right? It's like, right? And the mom says, oh my God, you were yelling and screaming. I thought this was something serious, and it's just a zit. Put some makeup on, okay? Or oh my God, you know what I went through when I was your age? And like, you're not hearing me. I am gonna be a unicorn. I am gonna be, I'm gonna be whatever, right? A rhinoceros, right? It's like to that kid, right? It's terrible, right? And it's gonna get worse, right? And then etc. So it's like, fine, this is terrible, according to you, and that is unfair, according to you. It's like, so what are we gonna do about it? Or you say, no, it's not. You're lucky. You're lucky you got it now. And then it's like, you're not getting my reality. The one that's delusional is the people that are telling me I'm lucky. Now, if we agree with each other, like, oh, thanks, I am lucky, right? Because I only have this, and it's not that it's great. It's something that's going to go away, right? So being able to deal with that and process that. Now he's 16, but when he's still stuck we're still talking about the 7-year-old or whatever that got stuck in a wheelchair. He's still stuck back there. He's still that angry kid that it's unfair and doesn't see this is what happens. There are people that actually they're stuck in a wheelchair from that point on for the rest of their life. And they got to reconcile that and deal with that, right? Because they're angry and that, right? And so being it's like, oh wow. And they may have bought it upon themselves, even though it's an accident, right? It's like being able to process all that. And what are the people that are able to say, oh, I feel so bad for you. I'm sorry that happened. Or people say, oh, you're lucky right off the bat. No, that's way later, okay? I saw a movie that was based on a real, this COVID, we're seeing all kinds of movies, man. But there's a movie, something and ride. It's a girl she was a rodeo, a barrel racer, 16, I think, or 17.
Oh, yeah.
Did you see that one?
Yeah, I saw it, and yeah, I don't want to give it away, but yeah, she still fights.
It's okay. But basically, what was her process that she had to go through, right? And the people that told her, no, you couldn't, but who are the people that said, why not? Right? And she had to go through that process and anger and all that and say, well, this is it, right? And except she was never going to walk again, but she was still going to be able to ride, right? So you see, and going through all that, and not just that, able to ride and be seen as beautiful and not feel pity for and a boyfriend and all that, right? It's like, talk about that versus the person who has a zit.
Yeah.
Right? Or a person who's like, I was stuck in it for 6 months, right? But now I don't need one. I can walk, I can jump, I can do exactly the thing that I did when I got injured. But he's still stuck. Okay, so it makes sense. Again, having it make sense. It's like, what are you really pissed about, Frankie? Who are you really pissed at? And it's okay to be pissed at your mom and your brother. It's like, why is he pissed at his brother? How come he didn't get in a wheelchair? Stupid little brat, right? How come me, not him? It's like, that makes sense. That's a legitimate question. I don't have a good answer for you, but it's a legitimate question. And so that's why getting the piece like, stop asking why. All you're doing is making things worse. Get rid of that and say, what happened? How did it happen, etc. And now what can we do? So the part we need to process what happened. Okay, so these thoughts, these recurring thoughts, they make sense. Okay, even for the person who's psychotic, they're schizophrenic. Okay, and medication will help them to have them be less. But it's like, but it makes sense. Where is it coming from? It's not just their neurology messed up. It's something in this says, I'm misdirecting this here. But usually, again, we're attempting to just give them something else to think about instead of where did this come from? Okay, again, we just want to reduce and eliminate. Well, we got to get to what produced it and how to redirect it, so that you can say, I don't feel that anymore. Okay, jealous, angry, etc., at whomever. Okay, so
Yeah, that makes sense.
okay, but that maybe since he's that age, and saying, giving him that homework, like, see this movie. You mean I'm a teenage girl? No. Oh my gosh. I'm hoping you're 16 and not a 6 or 7-year-old. So you really are asking me, saying, I'm wanting you to see this about a girl because I think you're a girl. No, it's about the human feeling. Okay?
Walk, ride, rodeo, right?
Yeah.
Walk,
Rock
ride,
Ride Rodeo.
One of those feel-good movies. They did a really good job. That accident was like, man, that was good. And your parents like, that's why you gotta wear. That's why I know. Wear your seatbelt all the freaking time. If something falls off, leave it alone. Right? You just, right, Mom Lily. Right? It's like, hey, why did it happen? I don't know, but part of the fact that you took your damn seatbelt off. Right? Part of what happens because you're riding. It's what happens when you do things, right? You get hurt, you get injured.
Yeah, this is awesome because I know he's actually going through like a lot. I feel like there's a lot of pent up anger that he's not expressing because he considers himself the quiet one. So he's non-confrontational. And so I just feel like it's a lot of anger, a lot of things that are happening that he's just keeping inside and he's not vocalizing it.
It's no accident that the quiet ones are the ones that do school shootings. Oh yeah. It's no accident. They're quiet. Yeah, but in their mind, man, they were going at it. They're going at it. The ones that don't do school shootings are the loud ones. They let it off. They don't pen it up. So I'm not worried about that one shooting up the school. And besides, they're not. And who is it? They're engineers or this and that. The one that's all over the place with I don't know what the heck my in college, right? I don't know what my major is, or they're like PE or drama or whatever. That person's not going to shoot any place up. They might talk about it, but they're not going to do it. The one that's going to shoot us, like, well, he was in his room all the time. We didn't know, and he was stockpiling, or we didn't know, right? It's like he was writing all this stuff, and we didn't know, right? And he had a therapist, and they didn't know, right? It's like it's all pent up and all pent up. It's like, and it's misdirected. And then you find out in their writings, and they look at their writings, like it started here, and this is who they're really pissed at. And sometimes they'll even kill their parents along the way, along with some other people. Who are they pissed at?
Yeah.
It makes sense. That's an exaggerated, response to you mom, dad, you didn't nurture me. You weren't there for me how I needed it. Not that you messed up, but you didn't do it the way I needed it. Okay. So yeah, that's the idea of, again, going back to the trauma. It's like there's something that clicks and has it go that way. It's not just about don't have violent thoughts. Everybody has violent thoughts. That's why we laugh when we're like, yeah, felt like upside the head. It's like, yeah, so did I. No, not me. I'm an angel. No, you're not. You're human. It's fun. It's funny. It's just as long as you don't do it like the Joker did. It's like
Like that.
you have blood and your feet are, does your feet prints leaving because the therapist, that stupid psychologist, was talking to you without you being chained up. Right? Who does that? Well, it's a movie, remember? Horror movies, they do stupid things in there. May that forensic psychologist that works with dangerous population actually interviews a person that way. Hell, I wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
No way. I don't think Lily would do that. Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
No, he's gonna try, but he can't get close. Man.
No.
know?
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. We'll talk about that when we see each other again. I'm really interested in knowing like just how far back he wants to go and talk, and does he want to go back that far again and bring it up and
Well, he doesn't, but you do. You're the one in charge of the therapy.
Yeah, I've tried. I mean, the furthest that we've gone is like sixth grade. Seventh grade is like the earliest that he noticed a change in like his attitude and everything. So we talked about it, but a lot of his answers are like, I don't know, I can't remember. How was your relationship with your mom? I can't remember. With your siblings, I don't know. Did you have many friends? I think. So it's been really hard to dig deeper with him because everything is, I don't know.
Okay, then I'm gonna get to somebody who does know. I'm gonna talk to your mom. I'm gonna talk to somebody that does know. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna tell him. I'm not gonna tell him what you told me, but I'm gonna ask him questions so I can say, "Oh, I talked to your mom and she told me this. I talked to your older sibling and they told me that. I talked to your Nina, aunt, uncle. It's like, you did? Yeah. Then I ask them questions because you don't remember. I talked to somebody that does remember.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, man, the question is, why did my therapist do that?
Like, why did my therapist talk to my mom? Is
Yeah.
that what you mean?
And my aunt, until she got the answers that
Oh.
she couldn't get from me.
Oh yeah, I mean, because I saw him today and I told him already, like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm going to check in with your mom either this week or next week, depending on my schedule. But I just wanted to let you know beforehand that I will be talking to your mom and just kind of asking her some questions. But obviously what you've told me is confidential because nobody knows. I guess he's the only person I know. The only person who knows is me, and he hasn't talked to his mom, dad, brothers, friends about these intrusive thoughts. So I already told him that I was going to be talking to his mom and finding out more information.
Yeah.
So he's in the know, and he's fine with that. I think he's gotten to the point. So therapy with him started really rocky and he didn't want therapy. And then once we did start talking, he's super open now. And now he's like hit that point of desperation, like, do anything. I will work with you on anything. I just need help.
Okay, so again, he's now accepting that you're the expert, not him. I need help.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be in charge of it, not me, because I'm not in charge of my thoughts that scare the hell out of me. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Why is my therapist pushing? Because I am that important to her.
Mm-hmm.
Why didn't they? One, they didn't know. Okay. And you're that important. But there's a difference between me and your mom and your dad. Your parents love you. I don't love you. I care about you. They appreciate that. I care about you. And I'm willing to do this because I want you to be able to say, I used to think this way, and then I figured it out, and even if I was pissed off at my therapist, it's fine. And that's a part of it you see in that process, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we see these movies that talk about true stories, like, and how I was pissed off at that person that pushed me. But then after I was able to do what they pushed me, you're one of my favorite people. Because you didn't freaking listen to me. You believed in me. You didn't accept my pessimistic, depressed, angry, I don't deserve help, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you see, and that's why, again, we are asked, and especially the more depressed the person is, especially the more desperate they are, we're to give them the hope and the confidence and not accept their I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so he knows that you're pushing and he trusts you because he knows you care. And you
Mhm.
need to know certain things because you need to know them maybe before he does, or you need to know so you can lead them there, because also there's that idea that our clients already know, right? But they're confused.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's why it's great. I love it when my clients get mad at me. Great. Finally. I'm not pushing you away. I'm not saying, not, it's like, good. That's a breakthrough. You know?
Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Wow. It's like 6:47. You guys want to keep on going for another 15 minutes or just want to end it? That's it. Go eat. I'm hungry. I want to go and eat.
I need to cook some dinner.
Same.
So definitely.
Same.
Okay.
All
All right.
right.
So great questions, and the rest of you guys hopefully learned something from even after we finish with the official presentation, talk about these cases, right? Because you're gonna get them too. I got somebody like that. Okay, so we'll see whenever we put this together, the portion that's about identification with the deceased, we'll package it and have it ready and there for you guys to review it again, and we'll have the slides, and then we'll come up with 2-3 questions for you to answer so that you can officially get credit for this time with the agency. And then it'll be there for the people that weren't here as well. Okay. Then we can review it, and feel free to bring it up again later if there was something that now you came up with a question or whatever. Lily can handle it. Doesn't have to be with me. That can handle it. Doesn't have to be with me. Okay, so we can say good night. Talk to you guys later.
Thank you. Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.